The stars above the neutral zone shimmered with quiet indifference, their cold light falling upon a lone vessel drifting between the borders of empires. The Mercy Dawn was no warship. Its hull bore no cannons, its crew carried no weapons. Painted. Across its surface were bright markings recognized throughout the galaxy, the universal symbols of a hospital ship. Inside, doctors, nurses, and volunteers worked tirelessly, tending to refugees from conflicts not their own. It was a beacon of compassion in a galaxy that often forgot such things existed. But compassion meant little to the Thalvar Empire. Their fleet emerged from hyperspace with the precision of a blade drawn from its sheath. Dozens of warships encircled the Mercy Dawn, weapons already primed. For the Thalvar, domination was survival, and survival meant no gesture of weakness could go unpunished. A hospital ship, they decided, was weakness in its purest form, an insult to their philosophy of strength above all. On the bridge of the Mercy Dawn, Captain Yara Ven tried to reason with them. Her voice, calm but firm, echoed across the comms. "This vessel is unarmed. We carry civilians, medics, and patients. To fire upon us would be a violation of every accord your empire has signed." Her words fell into silence, followed by a cold, flat reply. "Accords are for the weak." The first salvo struck without warning. The blast tore into the Mercy Dawn's flank, sending medics and patients sprawling as alarms shrieked. Fire suppression systems fought to hold back the inferno spreading. Through the corridors, screams echoed across the decks, not from soldiers, but from children, the injured, and those who had believed the bright medical insignias would protect them. In the engineering bay, a young systems engineer named Dr. Elias, Rourke struggled against smoke and chaos. He had not been assigned here as a soldier. He was a volunteer, using his technical skills to maintain life support systems while also assisting in triage when needed. The explosion had thrown him against a console, leaving his leg shattered. Yet even through the haze of pain, his mind raced, not with fear, but with a burning clarity. The Mercy Dawn shuddered as another barrage ripped through its core. Hull breaches spread like open wounds. In the medical bays, doctors shielded patients with their own bodies, refusing to abandon them. One by one, sections of the ship fell silent, lights flickering out as the Thalvar rained destruction without mercy. Elias dragged himself toward a damaged console, fingers flying across the keys. He rerouted power to life support, sealed bulkheads, where he could and kept the communication relays alive long enough to broadcast a distress signal. His voice was ragged, but his words carried across the stars. "This is the Mercy Dawn. We are under attack. Civilians aboard, medical crew aboard. Please, remember us." Moments later, the Mercy Dawn split apart in a brilliant flare, its remains scattering into the void. News of the massacre spread faster than light. Across human colonies, the response was the same. Silence, then grief, then anger. The hospital ships had always been untouchable, protected by mutual agreements even in times of war. To strike one down was not only an atrocity, it was a message, carved in fire. Yet in that silence, a seed was planted. Among the few survivors pulled from escape pods was Elias Rourke. Scarred, broken, and haunted by the screams of the dying, he woke in a recovery ward days later. His first words were not of sorrow, but of purpose. "They believe kindness is weakness," he whispered to the attending officer. His eyes, sharp and unyielding despite the pain, held the weight of something more than grief. "Then we will show them how dangerous mercy can be when betrayed." The galaxy would remember the destruction of the Mercy Dawn. But far more, it would remember the rise of a man who turned loss into fire. The Thalvar thought they had silenced humanity's compassion. Instead, they had awakened a mind that would burn their empire forever. The med bay of Horizon's Reach was quiet, but not peaceful. It carried the weight of survivors' breaths, shallow and restless, each one a reminder of what had been lost. Only a handful of escape pods had been recovered from the wreckage of the Mercy Dawn. Most of them carried broken bodies and haunted eyes. Dr. Elias Rourke lay in one of the recovery chambers, his leg encased in an advanced regrowth brace. Pain throbbed through him like a steady drumbeat, but it was nothing compared to the storm raging in his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the fire streaking through the corridors, heard the screams of doctors shielding patients, and smelled the acrid smoke of burning metal. He should have been broken by it. He should have been another name added to the long list of tragedies carved into humanity's history. Instead, something different had taken root in him. When the attending officer, Commander Hale, entered the chamber, Elias pushed himself upright, despite the pain. His voice was steady, controlled, though his hands trembled as if they held back a deeper fury. "Commander," Elias said, "I need data access. Ship schematics, fleet logs, supply chains, everything." Hale frowned. "You should be resting. The Council will handle this atrocity." Elias cut him off with a sharp look. "They'll debate. They'll argue over words like escalation and measured response. Meanwhile, the Thalvar will already be planning their next strike. You know it as well as I do." The commander didn't reply, but his silence was answer enough. Elias leaned forward, his voice dropping into something cold, something far more dangerous than rage. "They believe humanity's soft, because we build hospitals instead of warships, because we heal instead of destroy. They miscalculated. Mercy is not weakness, it is restraint. And they burned away our restraint." For a moment, Hale simply studied him. Then, with a quiet nod, he activated the console at Elias's bedside. "You'll have limited access. Don't make me regret this." Elias's fingers flew across the display. Pain and exhaustion vanished behind the precision of his thoughts. He examined fleet deployments, trade routes, and intelligence reports. He mapped supply chains and calculated attrition rates. Patterns began to emerge, hidden lines of weakness woven into the seemingly impenetrable tapestry of the Thalvar Empire. He whispered to himself as he worked. "Every empire has seams. You just need to know where to cut." Days blurred into nights as Elias refused rest, his body healing even as his mind sharpened to a singular purpose. He pored over tactical archives, historical case studies, even psychological profiles of Thalvar leaders. To the doctors, it looked like obsession. To Elias, it was clarity. By the time he was discharged from the medbay, he was no longer just a systems engineer. He had become something else entirely. A strategist forged not in classrooms or war colleges, but in the fires of betrayal. He requested a meeting with the Colonial Defense Council. At first, they dismissed him. He was young, unranked, and still limped from his injuries. But when he presented his models, projections so precise they predicted enemy fleet movements down to the hour, silence fell across the chamber. One counselor finally asked, "And what exactly do you propose we do with this knowledge?" Elias looked each of them in the eye. His voice carried none of the bitterness of grief, only the certainty of conviction. "We turn their philosophy against them. They think power is domination. We show them it is survival. They believe fear secures loyalty. We show them that fear breeds rebellion. We won't fight them where they are strong. We'll unravel them where they are blind." The chamber fell silent again, and though the counselors exchanged uncertain glances, Hale, standing in the shadows, felt a chill run down his spine. For in Elias Rourke's eyes, he saw not vengeance, but inevitability. Elias Rourke stood before a tactical display deep within the command center of Horizon's Reach. The chamber was quiet except for the hum of projectors casting swirling patterns of starlight across the room. A dozen officers leaned forward, eyes fixed on the shifting shapes, but none spoke. Elias's fingers moved with confidence across the interface, highlighting sectors and trade routes with deliberate precision. They believe we'll respond with fleets, Elias began, his tone calm, almost conversational. But fleets are exactly what they want us to commit. They've spent centuries refining direct warfare, building vast arsenals and hardened defenses. Meeting them on that field is suicide. One officer scoffed. So you suggest we do nothing? Elias didn't look up. On the contrary, we strike everywhere they're not looking. We don't need to shatter their navy, we just need to starve it. He tapped the console, and a red line traced a trade route threading through contested space. This convoy delivers refined plasma cores from their outer colonies to their warship foundries. If these cores stop arriving, their shipyards will grind to a halt within 3 months. Destroying the foundries is impossible. Intercepting the convoys is simple. Commander Hale leaned against the wall, watching the counselors' faces as murmurs spread. Elias pressed on. And here, Elias said, shifting the map to highlight a seemingly insignificant mining world, lies the only source of iridium they use for shield matrixing. Their empire spans thousands of systems, but the supply chain is funneled through one choke point. Isolating it will cripple their ability to repair damaged fleets. The room fell into thoughtful silence. It wasn't the grand strategy of crushing armadas or conquering planets. It was quieter, subtler, yet terrifying in its precision. Within weeks, Elias's plans were tested. A small strike team of corvettes slipped into the shadow of a nebula, intercepting a Thalvar plasma convoy. Instead of annihilating it outright, they sowed confusion, jamming communications, disabling engines, and letting half the freighters flee. Word of the attack spread quickly, but the details were fragmented, contradictory. The Thalvar assumed it was piracy. 2 weeks later, a similar disruption struck near the iridium mining world. Transport vessels vanished without explanation. Repair crews, already stretched thin, began reporting shortages. By the 3rd month, whispers circulated through Thalvar outposts. Some spoke of phantoms haunting supply lines. Others suspected rebellion among their vassal species. Few suspected the truth, that a young human with no military rank was quietly setting their empire aflame. Meanwhile, Elias remained methodical. He demanded patience from the fleet commanders, even as some grew restless. Every fire begins with embers, he told them. If we wait, the blaze will spread beyond their ability to contain it. The proof came sooner than anyone expected. A Thalvar task force, dispatched to secure the plasma convoys, was forced to divert resources from frontline deployments. This left one of their colonies vulnerable. Seizing the opportunity, human. Marines liberated hundreds of enslaved workers, who in turn carried with them critical intelligence about weak points in the Empire's administration. It was a small victory, measured not in territory but in momentum. Yet the effect on morale was immeasurable. Across human space, citizens who had once spoken of defense now spoke of resistance. And among the council, those who had doubted Elias began to see him differently. Not as a grieving survivor, but as a strategist reshaping the war itself. Still, Elias knew the danger of early success. He reviewed reports late into the night, cross-referencing supply shortages with enemy fleet redeployments. He whispered to himself, almost as if confessing to the stars, "This is only the beginning. They think we're gnats stinging at their ankles. They don't see the avalanche coming." As he closed the projection, Commander Hale approached quietly. "You've lit the first fire," Hale said. "The question is, can you control it once it spreads?" Elias turned, exhaustion etched into his face, but resolve unshaken. "Control isn't the goal, Commander. Collapse is." The ember had been struck. And soon, the galaxy would see how quickly a single spark could ignite an empire. The Thalvar Dominion prided itself on order. Its fleets patrolled trade routes with mechanical efficiency. Its governors enforced compliance with iron. Precision, and its citizens were conditioned to believe in the Empire's permanence. Yet, by the fourth month after the attack on Horizon's Reach, cracks were spreading across its vast machinery of control. Convoys vanished into nebulae, escorts failed to return from simple patrols, and colonies that once thrived began rationing supplies. At first, these disruptions were dismissed as isolated incidents, piracy, natural hazards, or incompetence. But the pattern grew undeniable. Entire production schedules faltered. Dockyards, once bustling with activity, now stood idle. Half-completed warships stranded for want of parts. In the heart of Dominion space, the High Regent summoned his war council. The chamber gleamed with obsidian walls and shifting holograms of star systems, yet the faces of the counselors betrayed unease. "These raids are coordinated," one admiral said, slamming his clawed hand against the table. "We face more than pirates. Someone is dismantling us from within." "Absurd," another retorted. "No species beneath us could orchestrate such precision. It must be rebellion from one of our client worlds, perhaps the Krith or the Varley." The High Regents. Cold eyes flickered across the chamber. "And yet none of them profit from these losses. Our enemies on the frontier report the same disruptions. The question remains, who dares?" Silence hung heavy. No one spoke the possibility aloud. That humanity, a species the Dominion considered weak and provincial, could be responsible. While the council argued, Elias Rourke studied the results of his latest campaign aboard the command deck of the cruiser Resolute. The atmosphere buzzed with restrained triumph as officers filed reports. 3 plasma convoys intercepted in Sector 9, one announced. "Minimal losses on our side." "Supply delay confirmed at their Iridium facility," another added. "Repair queues for shield arrays have doubled." Elias nodded, but he didn't smile. His mind was already 3 moves ahead. "They're beginning to see the pattern," he murmured, "which means they'll adapt. We have to escalate." "Commander." Hale frowned. "Escalate how? We've bled them without drawing their full attention. Push too far, and they'll unleash everything." "That's exactly what we need," Elias replied. He brought up a projection of the Dominion's frontier sectors. "They're shifting fleets inward to protect their supply lines. That leaves border worlds vulnerable. If we strike now, not to conquer, but to liberate, we turn their own subjects against them. Every flame we ignite weakens their grip further." Within days, Elias's plan was in motion. Human task forces descended upon a Dominion slave processing hub orbiting the world of Delvaris. The guards, expecting no resistance, were overwhelmed in a matter of hours. Thousands of prisoners, miners, laborers, and dissidents were freed. What shocked the Dominion most wasn't the loss of a facility. It was the aftermath. The freed captives broadcast messages across the stars, denouncing the Empire and praising humanity as their saviors. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion's vassals glimpsed an alternative to submission. News of Delvaris spread like wildfire. Uprisings flickered in distant colonies. Garrisons once loyal now hesitated, wondering if their obedience would soon brand them traitors to a collapsing regime. Back in the Dominion capital, the High Regent's composure cracked. "This is no rebellion," he hissed before the council. "This is war, and I will not have our empire mocked by vermin." He declared martial law across several sectors and authorized the deployment of their most feared fleet commander, Grand Marshal Zyron, to crush the disruptions. Elias received word of the escalation aboard the Resolute. Rather than worry, he felt the grim satisfaction of a man whose calculations had proven correct. "Now they see us," he said softly. "But it's too late. Every chain they forged is breaking, and no fleet can fight an enemy that lives inside their own empire." Commander Hale studied him, uneasy. "You've started a fire we can't put out, Elias. Are you certain it won't consume us too?" Elias's eyes hardened, his voice steady. "If it does, so be it. But I'd rather burn than kneel. The sparks had grown into flames, and the Dominion had finally realized it was standing in the middle of a spreading inferno. The Thalvar Dominion did not take humiliation lightly. When the High Regent placed Grand Marshal Xiron in command, the galaxy braced for blood. Xiron's name carried with it a reputation carved into star systems, worlds broken, rebellions erased, and enemies reduced to ash. His fleets arrived not as soldiers, but as executioners. The Dominion's response was swift and merciless. Entire colonies suspected of sympathy for humanity were scorched, their populations displaced or enslaved. Patrols tightened along every major trade route. Any vessel without unquestionable clearance was obliterated on sight. Where Elias Rourke's raids had left scars, Xiron's counteroffensives gouged open wounds. On board the command carrier Imperium's Wrath, Xiron studied reports with cold precision. His officers awaited orders, careful not to interrupt his calculating silence. "These humans think themselves clever," Xiron finally said, his deep voice reverberating like steel striking stone. "They are not warriors, they are pests, and like pests, they will learn that fire cleanses." He ordered his fleets into sweeping arcs, not merely chasing raiders but luring them. Decoys posed as vulnerable convoys, while hidden flotillas lay in wait. Slowly, losses mounted against Elias's scattered task forces. A half-dozen human frigates were lost in Sector 12, and a daring strike against a weapons depot ended in ambush, costing hundreds of lives. For the first time since his campaign began, Elias felt the sting of defeat. On the Resolute, the mood shifted from quiet confidence to somber determination. Officers whispered about the new enemy commander, about the trap-laden skies and the relentless reprisals. Commander Hale confronted Elias in the strategy chamber. "We've pushed them into fury, Elias, and now we're bleeding for it. If this continues, our people will lose hope." Elias stood before the holomap, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the swirling display of Dominion fleet movements. His jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. "Xiron is not a fool. He's forcing us into his game, so we stop playing it. Meaning, we adapt. That's what humans do. While he expects us to keep striking their supply lines, we'll change the board entirely. If he wants to bait us, let him choke on his own traps while we move where he least expects." The shift in tactics began quietly. Instead of direct strikes, Elias redirected his forces into surgical sabotage. Communications relays were disrupted, spreading confusion among Dominion fleets. Navigation buoys mysteriously failed, sending patrols off course into empty voids. Entire sectors found themselves unable to coordinate, paralyzed without a shot fired. But Elias knew sabotage alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to weaken Xiron's aura of inevitability, the belief that resistance was futile. For that, he planned something audacious. A strike not against supply depots or outlying colonies, but against Xiron's own command presence. The target was the Imperium's Wrath. Not to destroy it, that was impossible, but to infiltrate its sensor perimeter and broadcast proof that humanity could reach even the untouchable. The mission was daring, bordering on suicidal. A small flotilla of stealth-equipped corvettes crept into Dominion-controlled space, using debris fields and radiation belts as cover. Every creak of the hull felt like a death knell. Inside, Elias stood among the crew, calm but burning with focus. When they finally emerged within striking distance, the crew held their breath. The Imperium's Wrath loomed ahead like a floating fortress, bristling with weapons, its hull glowing. With the reflections of nearby stars, Elias didn't order an attack. Instead, he transmitted a message across every frequency, translated into flawless Dominion tongue. "Your empire believes itself eternal. Yet here we stand, unbroken, unafraid, within sight of your most prized warship. If you cannot protect your own, how can you claim to rule the galaxy?" The transmission played not only across Dominion military channels, but was intercepted by vassal worlds, smugglers, and even the neutral councils that once kept their distance. The message spread faster than the Dominion could suppress it. By the time Xiron realized what had happened, Elias's flotilla was gone, vanishing into the depths of space. On board the Imperium's Wrath, rage trembled beneath Xiron's control. "Find them," he growled, voice low with lethal promise. "Hunt them to the edge of existence. I will not be mocked." Back aboard the Resolute, Elias allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "Let him come," he whispered. "Every empire falls. Xiron just doesn't know he's already standing on the edge." The counteroffensive had begun, but the seeds of doubt were spreading faster than the Dominion's firestorms. For the first time, the galaxy whispered that perhaps the Thalvar were not untouchable, and Elias Rourke intended to turn whispers into conviction. The Dominion was an empire of iron, but even iron could rust when cracks appeared. Elias Rourke's infiltration message had been more than an act of defiance. It was a spark in a powder keg. Word of his broadcast spread through channels the Dominion could not silence. Traders in neutral zones repeated it. Refugees carried it from world to world. Entire colonies began to whisper that if humanity could defy the great war machine, then perhaps the Dominion wasn't invincible after. All on vassal worlds, cracks widened. Governors reported riots demanding independence. Some militias, long suppressed, took up arms in the shadows. The Dominion still ruled with fleets and firepower, but the certainty of its dominance wavered. And certainty, Elias knew, was the foundation of their strength. On board the Resolute, Elias stood before a gathered war council of captains, commanders, and engineers. The air was tense, but unlike before, it carried a charge of determination instead of despair. "They've begun to fear us," Elias said, pointing to the hollow map. "Not because we're stronger, but because we've proven their power isn't absolute. That fear will grow if we keep striking where it matters most. Not at their fleets, but at their control." Commander Hale frowned. "You're suggesting we stop fighting their war entirely?" "Exactly," Elias replied. "We fight ours. They expect grand battles. We'll give them uprisings, broken supply lines, worlds slipping through their fingers. Every time they tighten their grip, something else will slip free." The plan unfolded in waves. Instead of concentrated assaults, Elias scattered his forces into cells operating across dozens of systems. One strike group sabotaged a slave processing hub, freeing thousands who would carry tales of human defiance to the farthest reaches of the Dominion. Another task force destabilized orbital foundries, grinding warship production to a crawl. Most daring of all, Elias authorized transmissions, coded instructions sent secretly to rebel groups across Dominion space. "Rise," the messages urged. "The Empire bleeds. Strike now, and you will not stand alone." And rise they did. On the industrial world of Vexara, factory workers revolted, crippling weapons output. On the mining colonies of Kortal, laborers overran Dominion overseers and declared allegiance to no master but freedom, even mercenary. Groups, once loyal to Dominion credits, began quietly turning their services to human-led cells, sensing the winds of change. The Dominion responded with fury. Grand Marshal Xiron unleashed retaliatory strikes, burning rebellious settlements to ash. But every act of brutality only fueled the narrative Elias had crafted, that the Dominion was not an eternal ruler, but a desperate tyrant lashing out. Within the Resolute's command chamber, reports streamed in faster than they could be cataloged. The galaxy was shifting, and for the first time, humanity wasn't merely surviving. They were shaping events. Hale approached Elias during one late-night strategy session, her face lined with fatigue but her eyes alight. "You've done it. They're turning against the Dominion everywhere. But how long before Xiron adapts?" Elias studied the glowing holomap, watching entire sectors flicker with unrest. "He'll adapt. He's too smart not to. But that's the point. We're forcing him to spread thin. He can't be everywhere. And the more he tries, the more mistakes he'll make." Yet beneath his calm, Elias knew the stakes were climbing. Xiron was a predator, and predators grew most dangerous when cornered. That truth came sooner than expected. A message intercepted from Dominion Command revealed Xiron's next move. He intended to assemble the largest fleet in recent history, not to chase rebels piecemeal, but to crush them in one decisive campaign. "They're abandoning flexibility," Elias murmured as he read the decrypted orders. "He's putting everything into one strike." Hale leaned closer. "That could destroy us, or it could destroy him." Elias's mind raced. A massive fleet, concentrated and overconfident, was a blade waiting to be turned against its wielder. If he could engineer the battlefield, if he could guide Xiron into overextension, then the Dominion's greatest show of force could become the moment it began to crumble. He straightened, resolve hardening like forged steel. "Prepare the fleet. Signal our allies. Every rebel group, every ship, every fighter willing to stand must be ready. The tide is turning, and when it breaks, the Dominion will drown." For weeks, human cells and newly emboldened rebels worked in secret coordination. Hidden relays flickered with encoded messages. Supply caches were placed, routes mapped. Slowly, carefully, Elias laid the groundwork for what would be humanity's boldest stand yet. And far away, on the bridge of the Imperium's wrath, Grandy, Marshal Xiron watched his fleets gather like a storm on the horizon. He believed victory was inevitable, that his overwhelming force would crush this human genius and erase the stain of defiance forever. But Elias Rourke was already waiting. For him, the trap was being set, and the galaxy held its breath. The Dominion's fleet assembled like a tidal wave in the void, thousands of warships, dreadnoughts bristling with weaponry, carriers launching endless swarms of interceptors, destroyers lined in endless formation. It was the largest show of force the galaxy had seen in centuries, a gathering meant to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. At its heart stood the flagship Imperium's Wrath, its blackened hull adorned with the symbols of Dominion supremacy, a fortress in space. From the command throne, Grand Marshal Xiron studied the sea of ships with satisfaction. His voice was a low rumble as he addressed his war council. "The humans and their allies believe they are clever. They believe rebellion is strength. But rebellion burns brightest before it dies. We will end them in one strike, and the galaxy will see that. Defiance only brings ruin." Yet far beyond the Dominion's mighty armada, Elias Rourke watched from the bridge of the Resolute. His own fleet, though far smaller, moved like shadows across the stars, their movements hidden by clever use of stealth fields, electronic warfare, and the blind spots of the Dominion's own overconfidence. "They've taken the bait," Elias murmured, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. Commander Hale stood beside him, arms crossed. "All of them? Every ship? More than we ever dreamed. Xiron's pride has drawn him into the open. He thinks size alone guarantees victory." Elias's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. "That's his mistake. The battlefield was not chosen by chance." Elias had spent weeks preparing the system of Kalinon, a seemingly unremarkable star system whose planets had long been stripped of resources. To Xiron, it was simply where rebel activity had been sighted. To Elias, it was a carefully prepared arena, seeded with hidden mines, disguised stations, and relay points that would allow his scattered forces to converge at the perfect moment. When the Dominion fleet entered the system, their sensors lit up with what appeared to be a massing, of rebel ships. In truth, it was a carefully orchestrated illusion. Drones broadcasting false signatures, decoys simulating larger fleets, distortions hiding the real positions of the human and allied forces. "Multiple enemy fleets detected," one of Zyron's officers cried. "They're scattered across the system." "Crush them all," Zyron commanded with disdain. "No half measures." The Dominion fleet split, chasing ghosts. Groups of dreadnoughts pursued phantom fleets into asteroid belts rigged with explosives. Carriers unleashed fighter wings against decoys that suddenly detonated, shredding squadrons in brilliant bursts of fire. Every movement they made bled their strength, and every engagement cost them dearly without yielding real victories. Then came the second phase, from the darkness. Beyond the system, hidden fleets emerged. Human ships, rebel allies, mercenary bands who had chosen to turn against their old masters. They struck not in open battle, but at fuel convoys, communication hubs, and isolated detachments. The Dominion's vast armada, designed for frontal warfare, found itself scattered and bleeding from countless small cuts. On the bridge of the Imperium's wrath, frustration flared. "Reports of losses from the Kortal wing. The third carrier group has gone silent." Zyron's eyes narrowed. He rose to his full height, his voice sharp. "This is not war. It is trickery. They will not break the Dominion with shadows. Gather the fleet. We will smash their core force directly." But that was exactly what Elias had prepared for. When Zyron pulled his surviving fleets inward, converging on the apparent location of the Resolute and its allies, they entered the jaws of the trap. Concealed orbital platforms activated, unleashing torrents of fire. Ion storms, triggered by carefully timed charges on planetary crusts, erupted across space, scrambling Dominion systems. Ships collided, misfired, or spun helplessly as their formations broke apart. And then Elias struck. From behind shattered moons and drifting asteroid fields, the true Allied fleet surged forward, smaller, faster, but coordinated with surgical precision. They hit flanks, rear lines, and command relays, turning the Dominion's bulk into chaos. On the Resolute, Hale gripped her console. "They're folding. Their formations collapsing." "Not yet," Elias said, eyes locked on the enemy flagship. "Zyron's still out there. Until he falls, they'll keep fighting." He gave the order. Human cruisers and Allied frigates angled their assault toward the Imperium's wrath. Torpedoes lanced through the void, carving fire across the massive flagship's hull. Shield lines flickered, but the behemoth endured, returning fire with devastating barrages that tore through smaller ships. In the chaos, Elias knew the truth. This was the moment. The trap had weakened the Dominion, but it would take more than cleverness to break them. Zyron had to be defeated, not just militarily, but symbolically. The galaxy needed to see the great predator fall. He turned to Hale, his voice calm but resolute. "Prepare a boarding team. I'm going in." Shock rippled across the bridge, but no one argued. They all understood. This was not just strategy anymore. It was destiny. Elias Rourke, the survivor of a hospital ship massacre, the genius who had turned rebellion into fire, was about to face the architect of their suffering. And on the bridge of the Imperium's wrath, Grand Marshal Zyron sharpened his claws and smiled grimly. He had wanted the human alive. Now, fate was delivering him right into his grasp. The stage was set. The Resolute drew closer to the Dominion flagship, its hull shaking from the intensity of the exchange. Human and Allied ships swarmed around, buying precious moments by distracting the Imperium's wrath. A breach pod launched, cutting across. The chaos of battle like a spear hurled at the heart of the beast. Inside, Elias Rourke stood among his chosen strike team, armored and armed, his eyes fixed forward. For years he had planned, outwitted, and guided the rebellion with cold logic and cunning traps. But now, It came down to something far older and simpler: courage, will, and the strength to face the architect of countless deaths. The breach pod slammed against the Dominion ship's hull, magnetic clamps biting deep. A cutting charge flared, carving a hole through armor that had once been thought impenetrable. The strike team stormed inside. Dominion soldiers met them instantly, their armor gleaming, weapons shrieking with energy. The corridors of the flagship became a furnace of fire and steel. Elias moved with precision, directing his team to cover choke points, exploiting every architectural weakness of the Dominion ship he had studied for months. Each step forward was paid for in blood, but they advanced floor by floor toward the throne chamber of Grand Marshal Xiron. As they neared the command deck, resistance grew fiercer. Hale fought at Elias's side, her rifle crackling with energy fire. "They'll never let us reach him alive," she shouted over the din. Elias's voice was calm despite the chaos. "That's because they know what happens if we do." Finally, the last barricade fell. The great doors to the throne chamber hissed open, revealing a cavernous hall of blackened metal and glowing crimson light. At its center stood Xiron, massive and imposing, clad in ceremonial armor etched with the Dominion's emblems. His eyes glowed with cold amusement as he stepped down from his command throne. "So," Xiron's voice rolled like thunder, "the ghost of a hospital ship dares to challenge an empire." Elias stepped forward, weapon lowered. "Not a ghost, a man, and men can burn empires to ash." The duel began. Xiron lunged with inhuman speed, his claws wreathed in energy, tearing through metal as though it were paper. Elias countered with a plasma blade, sparks showering as weapon clashed against weapon. The human genius fought not with brute strength, but with precision, using Xiron's momentum against him, striking at weak points in his armor. Around them, the battle still raged. Hale and the strike team held off Dominion guards while the chamber shook from the greater space battle outside. But in that moment, everything narrowed to Elias and Xiron, two figures locked in combat that would decide the fate of billions. "You are clever," Xiron snarled, forcing Elias back with a crushing blow. "But cleverness dies when strength endures." Elias staggered, his armor sparking, but his eyes never wavered. "Strength without wisdom only destroys itself." He feigned a stumble, drawing Xiron into overextending. In that heartbeat, Elias drove his blade upward, piercing the seams of Xiron's armor at the joint. The Grand Marshal roared, striking back with a devastating blow that hurled Elias across the chamber. Pain shot through him, but he forced himself to rise, gripping his weapon with both hands. Xiron advanced, wounded but furious. "You cannot win. You are human. You are—" Elias cut him off. "Human, exactly. That's why you've already lost." With one final surge, Elias activated a charge he had planted earlier, a timed explosive set against the command throne's power conduit. The chamber erupted in a cascade of energy, throwing Xiron off balance. Elias closed the distance in a single breath and drove his blade deep into the Grand Marshal's chest. Silence fell. Xiron's massive form sagged, eyes wide with disbelief. He tried to speak, but no words came. Then the Titan crumbled, collapsing to the floor, the light fading from his gaze. The Dominion guards froze. Their leader, the symbol of their empire's might, was gone. Across the galaxy, as word spread through fractured communication networks, fleets hesitated, soldiers faltered, and rebellions surged. The myth of Dominion invincibility had died with Xiron's last breath. Elias stood over the fallen warlord, chest heaving. Hale approached, steadying him. "It's done," she whispered, but Elias shook his head. "It's only begun. Empires don't fall in a single day. But now the galaxy knows they can fall." From the shattered chamber, Elias sent the signal, The rebellion's banner transmitted across every channel, every world, every occupied system. Not just a declaration of victory, but of freedom. The Dominion's age of terror was ending, and humanity, once thought fragile and weak, had ignited a fire that would burn across the stars. As the Resolute and allied fleets regrouped around the crippled remains of the Dominion flagship, Elias allowed himself a moment to breathe. The hospital ship he had once served on, the lives lost in that cruel attack, would never return. But their memory had carried him here, had fueled the genius and the fury that turned grief into revolution. The galaxy would remember the Dominion as a nightmare. But it would remember Elias Rourke as something else entirely, the man who proved that even in the darkest night, humanity could light the stars on fire.